Hello and welcome to another edition of 209 Prep Sports. Today we're going to have a special guest in the studio, Coach Mark Miller. But before we get to that, we're going to kind of talk about a few things and follow up on a few things that we've done in the past. As you know, we're still on a holding pattern for the restrictions that are put forth for COVID, but it seems like things are starting to loosen up a little bit. We're starting to see a little bit more action on the practice field. I don't know in terms of restrictions for the indoor sports, but I do know that the conditioning, the weightlifting, and all that is kind of back in action. We did this week, Grant. We looks like we received some emails, and I think maybe we'll get into those first and talk about that a little bit and some of the information that we can help our listeners out with. So what did we hear from this week?
Yeah, we got one that says, you guys mentioned there might be a lack of officials because there will be multiple sports going on at once. How can someone get involved with officiating?
That's a great point. I know we talked about that on a previous show. I really think that because of the way that they have everything aligned where, we're going to have football and volleyball and winter sports and everything kind of converging all at once. I know we talked about the difficulties that are going to occur with that, with the athletes, where you have an athlete that's a football player that might be a star basketball player that may also be, say, a track athlete or, a baseball athlete, how that's going to play out. But the one thing that I think is really going to kind of dictate scheduling and all that is going to be officials. We're usually on a high school officiating crew. It's a 5-man crew. You've got the head referee, the umpire, the 2 side judges, and a back judge. And I think that they're probably going to have to get creative with those crews a little bit. You might see a 4-man crew. You might even see a 3-man crew. But I think where you're going to also see changes because of officiating is scheduling. I think there are going to be events all throughout the week. You're probably going to see high school football games played on a Wednesday night, just because of the lack of officiating. Volleyball games on a Monday. Maybe with one. Usually high school volleyball has 2 officials, and now I think you might be seeing them with one official. But that's gonna play a huge role when things do get going, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But to get back to the listener's question, how can they get involved, or how does a person become an official? And I know you've done a little research on that.
Looks like the best thing to do is go to the Northern California Officials Association, or the NCOA.info, the website, and they're actively recruiting. So
yeah, that's good. So I know part of the process is you go in. You fill an application, depending on what sport you want to do. If you're an ex-football player and you want to get back involved in the sport and you don't have time to coach, I think officiating is a great way to do it. There's a little bit of a commitment. I think in all of the sports, there's a commitment in terms of training. I know at the beginning of each season, they have training sessions to cover rule changes, rule updates, those types of things. And then I think periodically throughout the season there's training, but for the most part, your biggest commitment is going to be to the games themselves. So, for football, for example, on a typical year where we're not dealing with the pandemic that we're dealing with now. So on a typical year, you'll be part of a crew, and your crew stays together all year. You'll get assigned to a game. So let's say, for example, you're assigned to the Stagg High School versus Edison High School on Friday night. And your crew's going to do both the JV and the varsity football games. And if there's a freshman football game that they schedule on that day as well, you're going to do 3 games. Typically, they try to schedule freshman football on Thursday nights, but who knows what's going to happen now. So what was the website again?
The Northern California Officials Association, the NCOA.info.
Okay, so go on there. I think it will. Once you get on there, it'll direct you on where you need to go to fill out an application and what sport you're interested in. And they're the ones that really kind of dictate, how officials are assigned and so forth. And I'm sure there's probably going to be information on there for all the training and all the dedication that you need to have to be an official. But if that's something you're you might want to look into, by all means do it, because our youth sports programs are going to be in need of good officials for sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, another one says we hear and see athletes committing to their particular schools. How is that happening with no sports going on?
That's a great question. I would hope that if there are athletes out there, again, a big part of our show is to showcase athletes that are in the recruitment process, that are currently getting recruited, athletes that have been committed. Last week we had Skylar, who is a golfer, who committed, and it was really interesting to see how she went through the process. But that's dramatically changed. If you're a football player, your biggest platform to get recruited as a football player is high school football. You don't have a club sport that's, say like volleyball or baseball or basketball. AAU basketball, I think they're probably going to be at full speed, but because as a national organization, they can just kind of move their tournaments around to states that are going to allow them to play. Well, as a football player, that's going to be really difficult because you're going to get recruited by what you do in high school, and so I know that there are, you and I had talked about this before, I know that there are recruiting companies out there that athletes and their parents can pay these companies to help get them recruited. Quite honestly, I've never wrapped my head around that because I'm not a big believer in people profiting off of athletes who are trying to get to the next level. I just, I may be alone in that thinking, but I'm just not an advocate for that. I think if we've talked about this before, if you want to make it to the next level, there's a process, and I just don't think that a third party should really come into play there. I think it should be a relationship between the athlete and the schools that are recruiting. And if you really are serious about getting recruited, especially now with the way things are going on, I think it's incumbent on the athlete themselves to reach out to the schools that they're interested in. If you're passionate and you want to play, let's say you're a football player and you want to play at the next level, reach out to that school. Email the coach. Let them know that you're interested. I know each of these schools have athletic programs, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, whatever. They have a recruiting form on the website, and so if you go on there, it's like a athlete prospect form. And so you go on the website. Let's say, for example, you're a volleyball player and you want to play University of Pacific. If you go to their website, I'm sure that they probably have a potential athlete recruiting form on there, and you go in and ask for certain information, address, interest, maybe some biological information, your height, weight, those types of things. But one of the things universally that's going to be needed is your NCAA clearinghouse number. I won't go into detail about that now, but that might be something worth discussing at a future show, and we can go from there. But that's a great question. I think the basic answer to that is, I think more now than ever, it's going to be pushed back to the athlete to assist with their own recruiting, just because they're not in a place where they can be seen. So keep your emails and questions coming. Just for anything that you have, anything you want to hear from us on, anything you want added to the show. If you're an athlete that's getting recruited, committed, we want to hear from you. Twitter at 209prep, and on Facebook at 209prep sports. And we'd love to hear from you at our email platform. We're starting to get more and more action there. And that's going to be prepsports209 at yahoo.com. Again, prepsports209 at yahoo.com. And so that brings us to the portion of our show where we have a guest today, and we're going to introduce him here in just a second. But this interview is being brought to you by Herrera Insurance and Financial Services Incorporated, the premier commercial farm and life insurance agency in the 209. For all your personal and business insurance needs, you can locate us at www.hifsinc.com or by phone at 209-649-8863. Herrera Insurance and Financial Services Incorporated is a proud sponsor of the 209 Prep Sports Podcast, helping our youth fulfill their athletic dreams and endeavors. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. It's longtime coach Mark Miller, who was the head coach at Linden High School, I think, over 2 different campaigns. Spent a lot of time coaching football. Currently the head softball coach at Linden High School. I think at one point or another, he's probably coached every high school sport. But Coach Miller, welcome to the show. If you could maybe give us a quick background of, what you've done over the years. And I know Grant and I will have some questions for you after that.
Scott, I got to tell you what, this is really a service you're doing here, you and Grant, and you're doing high school sports a huge favor. It's what we need here in the Valley. My background is pretty much coaching at Linden High School. I've had the opportunity to be involved in the athletic program at Linden for, I don't want to say this, but over 50 years. And I taught history and English for 40 years. Had the opportunity to serve as the assistant coaches to some great coaches, Steve Campora, Gary Scott, Tim Patterson. And I've had some great assistant coaches who work under me during the time I served as head coach. And one of them is right sitting here next to me is Scott Bryant. And one of the former players is sitting right here to me, Grant Winters. But it's been a real pleasure. I think this area is, we're all blessed to be here. And I really like the idea of a small town environment. Kids have an opportunity to be somebody. They have an opportunity to play the game they love. And they have the opportunity to play in front of a township that adores high school athletics and supported by a tremendous athletic booster club that is, in my eyes, second to none.
Sure, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. I think you have a lot historically to bring to our show. There's been a lot of, I keep using the word historical, but there really truly has been a lot of programs in the area that have, at one point or another, depending on, and we can talk about football, we can talk about volleyball, we can talk about every sport. I think you can kind of look back and attach it to a certain point in time where that school just dominated. And in order for that to happen, you really have to then look at the coaches. Who were these coaches that really developed these programs to get them to where they are now? And we'll talk about that for a few minutes. And then I think after that, I think that kind of parlays into the conversation of where are we at now with some of these programs. But Coach, I know you've had a lot of great battles over the years with other coaches in other programs, and I know that you also are familiar with a lot of coaches in the area that developed some great programs that maybe you guys didn't cross paths, but I know that you know them, and maybe talk a little bit about that. I know that you've had some story teams at Linden High School, and we'll kind of parlay that for another conversation. But I know you had mentioned, like the Loreros of Escalon, the Schneider, Wayne Schneider of Tracy. But maybe I'll just pass it off to you, and you can kind of elaborate on some of that stuff.
Don't pass it too hard, Coach. I can't catch a pass very well.
Neither can I.
Well, I'm going to tell you what. Over the years, I've met some amazing people that have the privilege of being called a coach. And while we coached against each other on Friday nights, we were adversaries. But before the kickoff and after the last play, we were the best of friends. And some of the names I look over, my gosh, I look at Bob and Mark Lorero from Escalon, and those are good people. And you look at the Escalon Cougars, and I think just the name itself speaks for itself. They have a tradition and a history. I look at Tracy with Wayne Schneider and his crew over there, and When I coached with Wayne, he had assistants in Dutch Gross and Mike Miller. Good people.
And Coach, real quick, with Wayne Schneider, he was also, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was also kind of the father of the All-Star game too, right?
Wayne Schneider had a lot to do with it. Our local Vic Solari Sr. had a lot to do with it. Felix Romo up in Sonora had a lot to do with it. It was just what happened, the Elks game was dropped. And there was a group of people in the Lions Club, thank goodness for the Lions Clubs, that said, we need something here in our area. And they got together and put a committee together and formed the idea of the Lions All-Star Game. And the first game was in 1974. And that was, it was held at UOP. What an experience. And Scott, you had a chance to play in that game. And I had the opportunity to coach in that game. And it's something you'll take with you forever for the whole life. But, man, I just look at the list. I just look at the schools in this area. Joe Nava at Stagg, Coach Norton at Stagg, Jim Brown at East Union, Walker Vick at Manteca, Irv Hatzenbuehler at Galt. There's a legendary name right there.
That's the coach, and I know he had some absolutely fantastic
boy
Galt, but he was the coach that kind of kept the single wing alive for a long time, wasn't he?
I remember one time we had to play Riverbank, who was running the single wing. And so I called her. Irv was my offensive line coach at Pacific when I was at Pacific. And I called Coach Hatzenbuehler and I said, Irv, we're playing the single wing coming up. What do I need to do differently? He said, don't do a darn thing different. That's the purpose of the single wing, to get you to change everything so you really don't know anything. So he was right on the button.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Coach Hatzenbuehler, wasn't he also the coach that he was in the middle of a game and was having chest pains and refused to go to the hospital?
Yes.
And so when they finally got him to the hospital after the game, he had had a heart attack during the game, but refused to do anything about it.
That's Hatzenbuehler. That's Coach Hatzenbuehler. He's tough as nails, boy. Almost too tough for his own good.
Yeah, exactly.
But going right along, Coach Charlie Washington at Edison.
Oh, boy, yeah.
They have the Charlie Washington Award, and it goes such a great cause. And his legacy will last forever. There's, my gosh, Steve Town at St. Mary's, Dwayne Isetti at St. Mary's. You got Gary Scott, who coached at, Delta College, but he was also the coach here at Linden. Yeah. And coached at Sanger High School and at Delta College.
And at one point became the athletic director.
Yes, sir. At Calaveras, we had Mike Flock, Gary Stupensky, and current coach Jason Weatherman. All those are amazing people. And they're coaching for the right reasons. Right. They're worried about the kid other than the fact that he's wearing 72 or 81 or whatever. He has their best interests at heart. And gosh, whatever name I left out, I'm remiss, because you go right down the list. You look at a school and you think of a name that pops up. Yeah. And that's...
And I know football is near and dear to your heart, and so is softball, but when we look at kind of the landscape of women's sports in the area, yep. One of the names that, and again, it's because maybe we're from Linden, but one of the names that I think was a pioneer in the sport, we are now the beneficiaries of seeing high school volleyball at a level in this area unlike anywhere else. I mean, we're seeing high school volleyball athletes go on to play at the next level, probably more so now than ever. And one of the coaches that had a lot to do with that, I think, is Bill Rood.
Oh boy.
Bill Rood won three state championships
yes.
While at Linden, and probably can't even count how many section championships. And
do you know the story behind him, Coach? He was hired to coach football.
Right.
And then Chuck Leach asked him, can you coach volleyball? And he took it from there and ran with it.
Yeah. And I think at a time when St. Mary's has always kind of, in our area, been a tremendous volleyball program, but I think you saw Linden get equal with them and actually at one point surpass them. But now we're seeing, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but now we're seeing all these different levels in terms of divisions and so forth. But I think volleyball-wise, I mean, we've seen some good programs over the years. Linden, St. Mary's. I think Manteca had some good years. Tokay, I know, has had some tremendous players come out of that program. But women's volleyball in the area, I think for the most part, you're going to go school to school, you're going to see good volleyball players. Tracy's had some good years recently. Some good players come out of that program. West High School, which I think it bears just kind of remembering Chris Toon, who was the varsity volleyball coach there. Unfortunately, she passed, but she was absolutely tremendous coach, and she's definitely going to be missed.
Bret Hart High School used to have some pretty good ball clubs.
Bret Hart had some great. I know there were some great battles, between them. But when we move the focus into winter sports, and we look at some of the basketball programs, I mean, Edison High School, I think Franklin for a while had some great programs. St. Mary's, obviously, year in and year out, has great basketball. Any other schools come to mind basketball-wise, Coach, in the area over the last 30, 40 years?
You know what? Argonauts always had a good basketball team.
Yeah.
Always have been competitive. And there was a series of years there where Linden had some great basketball teams. In fact, one year they went up to, it's a Division I school, and they won the tournament, and they were 29-3 that year.
And Mike Zachlin
was the coach. Yeah. They had a great ball club.
Grant, you weren't playing back then, were you?
No.
You might not even been born then. Yeah. And then as we kind of take a quick view at baseball, softball in the area, there's been some great players. We've spent some time talking about our current list of major league ball players, but when we talk about programs, again, programs that come to mind, I think you have to look at St. Mary's again. Lincoln High School has put some great baseball teams on the field over the years. Softball as well. Jim Rubianis, when he was the head softball coach at Lincoln High School, he had some. I think he had a streak there where when you played Lincoln, you just weren't going to beat them. Like they would put a softball team, and they would have players on that team that you knew were going to play in college. I think Tokay's had some good baseball teams over the years. Anything else? Any other programs? How about you, Grant? More recently, some of the programs that might come to mind.
The first ones that come to mind are probably like the Tracy's in the West. I remember they had some good teams when I was there, and like not trying to be a homer, but Linden's put out a good baseball team for a very long time.
Absolutely, And we talk about coaches. Bob Ammerman, head coach at Linden High School for, I think, like 102 years or something like that.
You might be sounding a little short.
Yeah, but he was there for a long time and was a great head coach. But so we, Coach Miller, we love talking sports. We love talking prep sports. It's always good to take a look back at where we came from. And one of the conversations that we've had offline is the divisions. So we've seen a state go from, I think for the longest time, there were 3 divisions. Is that correct?
A, AA, and AAA.
Okay. And that was when, I don't even remember when they were called A, AA, and AAA. That's got to be back in the 70s.
1977, we played for the Class A section title, and that was the bottom of the set. AAA's were your Stags and Lincolns.
Okay. And now we are, and Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at 7, 8, 9 divisions. And Coach, from maybe you can kind of give us perspective on that. From when you coached, and like you said, there were 3 divisions, and now we're seeing, all of these divisions, and not all of them have the same sports. I mean, if you're in Division 7, I don't think there's a Division 7 football. I don't know. Maybe there is. I got to catch up on my reading when it comes to that stuff. But Coach, what kind of impact do you think over the years having all of these new divisions play with some of these sports?
Well, what this has done, I think, the creativity of all these new schools that are coming in, especially the smaller schools. And it kind of levels the playing field a little bit for them to give them chance to play for something bigger than what they've ever been accustomed to. And to put them against some of those bigger schools, it really wouldn't be a competitive situation for anybody. But we have floated from the present situation. We've floated from Division 4 to 5 to 6. We've played in all 3 levels. And it seems to be now which sport you're playing.
Yeah.
Because softball might play in this division, baseball might go to that division, football might go to another division yet. And,
right.
And I don't have the privy to know which division what qualifies you to do what.
One would think that by having all these divisions, it gives schools and beyond that, the respective sports, a greater opportunity to be successful.
Amen.
And so when you do that, obviously, from a talent perspective, you're going to have a wide range of talent. But would you say that maybe because of that, it's increased participation at the high school level in a lot of these sports?
Oh, I'm almost certain it has. I see it really, really in your individual sports. Mm-hmm. Your wrestling, your track. You see kids that size school doesn't really matter so much. Yeah. In the individual sports, it's you lay it out there and you give it a chance to compete for something really big. But, kids like that saying, well, we're going to the playoffs. They like to be able to say that.
Yeah. Or
we went to the playoffs. So remember we went to the playoffs? And that's something they'll take with them till the day they die.
That's right. Yeah. And at one point, going to the playoffs, by the time you're 60 or 70, turns into a state championship, I think. So, the older I get, the greater it was. Is that the same?
Coach, I can run a 4.840 now, bud.
Yeah, right. If I was driving a Corvette, I probably could do a 4.840. But, so it's interesting to see kind of, how the leagues over the years have, we had the SJAA, and it was always the Franklin, Edison, Stagg, St. Mary's, it was always the same group of schools. But then as we started building more schools, obviously, you can only play so many games, so it created new leagues. And we've seen leagues get stronger. We've seen leagues get weaker. We've seen, and I think everything's to a certain point is cyclical. But really, going back to my original point of conversation was, I think a lot of that, you look right back to the coaching. When like what you were talking, Tracy High School would probably be a good example of that. Mm-hmm. Tracy High School was always the only high school in that Tracy area. And because that area has grown so much with people moving over from the Bay Area or wherever, and I think there's a lot of industry. Yeah, so now you've got Tracy High School, you've got West High School, you have Kimball High School, you have Millennium. Yeah. Is there another high school over in that area that I'm missing?
Mountain House is
Mountain House. That's right. So Mountain House. So now you have all of these schools, and probably to a certain degree have kind of thinned out the talent. But I think everything when that initially occurs and a new school opens up, I think things eventually balance themselves out. Yeah. But if we go back, and I know I keep hitting on this because it was an era that I grew up in. But it just seems like the teams at the top level, you always looked to the Tracy Bulldogs. I mean, they were dominant.
That's how you measured yourself.
That's right. They were dominant, and they didn't have anybody to compete with in the Tracy area. And I know, maybe at some point we can have Wayne Schneider on the show. It'd be great to talk to him. But it's kind of like comparing that to the Linden or St. Mary's in volleyball. I know we talked about that a few minutes ago, but it's it does give you, like you said, a measuring stick. I want to be like that as a coach someday.
Coach, before going back further than what you just said it, Tracy was the only school in town at one time.
Right.
And so was Stagg, Franklin, and Edison were the only schools in town. And that's when they belonged to the old CCC. It was those 4, and then Modesto, and Lodi was a one-school town. And that was quite a league. And Merced was in it.
Yeah.
That was quite a league.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to go back to one thing. And as you know, I coached wrestling for a long time. That's the one sport that I think, in my opinion, and my opinion differs from most wrestling coaches, because they completely disagree with me on this, but why we haven't gone to divisions in the sport of wrestling is beyond me. We have one state championship. We may be the only state left in the United States that has a single state championship, one division. And while if you win that state championship, you are the elite of the elite. You're considered one of the best in the nation.
You're number one.
Yeah, but I think what that does to the sport, I think it eliminates a lot of people too, because the participation level goes down, because I'm never going to win a state championship. I have no shot at that. So I'm like, I'm going to do something else.
Good point.
And it's funny because one of the most popular sports we have in the United States right now is UFC. And if you look at the UFC, the most successful fighters in the UFC on average are wrestlers. Obviously there's some, jiu-jitsu people that are really successful and all this and that, but it really comes back to wrestling. So I guess I'm kind of on a soapbox a little bit there, but I will say this. One program that comes to mind for me in the area that wrestling-wise that was dominant for a period of time was Houston High School. Houston High School would win section championship after section championship. And I forgot what year it was, but they had one year where they only had 10 kids in the room. And in a sport where you have 14 spots, you find it very difficult to compete in a dual meet because you're giving up 6 points for each one of those spots. So you're already down. But Houston High School almost won a state championship as a team that year. They placed second in the state because every single one of those 10 kids were phenomenal. And I think 2 of those 10 kids actually won state championships. So that to me, when we talk about storied programs in the past, I know it's a little bit outside of our purview, but Houston High School was definitely one of those schools. And then, we talk about
Calaveras was pretty good too.
Calaveras
and Bret Hart had some good teams.
Calaveras, Bret Hart have had some tremendous teams, no doubt. But it's interesting to get your perspective on things, Coach. We appreciate you being here. Grant, you have any questions for Coach Miller?
Just one that I was thinking about was, you said you've been coaching football, especially a long time. Yeah. What's it been like seeing the progression of how kids have gotten, say, more athletic and how offenses have gotten just different over the years?
I don't know if it's so much offense. I mean, offense is an offense. But I think your weight programs that have improved tremendously, the kids have really developed their skills.
Yeah.
Their strength, their agility, their speed. And it's just fun to be around all that. No kidding. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and it seems like, back in the day, like you said, it was part of it, but it wasn't really pushed that much because you didn't have the weight rooms at schools like you have now.
Coach, when I first took it, we had coffee cans full of cement.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what we used, yeah.
Exactly. And so when they're building these high schools now, they're building weight rooms. They weren't building weight rooms back in the day. You'd go to the gymnasium or you go wherever. But now, that's a great question, Grant. I think, part of that answer, too, is definitely, the advent of the use of the weight room. And now you can not only say that, but you're also seeing kind of a paradigm shift on how the weight room is used. Yeah. So, it used to when you would bring in the weight room into the picture for football, you get in there, we got to do squats and we got to do bench press and this and that. Well, many coaches might see those as still important lifts, but now, through research and really, coaches always wanting to get that extra edge, we're now seeing the Olympic style lifts being incorporated more into the program. We're seeing, some CrossFit stuff kind of transition into the development. And it seems like if you're not keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to that, you're going to get left in the dust. So we're seeing coaches that have to specialize in that stuff. And if they don't, they got to bring people in that do. Yeah. And that's a big change for sure. I mean, like you said, Coach, lifting coffee cans full of cement is a far cry from doing power cleans with rubber rubber weights, So we've seen a big change, and it's been a great change. But anything else you kind of want to talk about while you're in here, Coach?
Yeah, I just want to say what a great job you two are doing. You're putting that out there for people to see, be a part of, and share their opinion and ask questions.
Well, we appreciate that, and we're definitely going to have you on again. We want to spread the word. Our goal is to make this a platform for listeners. We're going to talk about the things that our listeners want to talk about. I think it was great perspective to talk to you about this. Now we're stuck in a weird time where we don't have any sports, and so I think it's great to get a historical perspective. And if there's more stuff you want to talk about, we're going to have you back on the show, and we're definitely going to talk about that.
I just want to say this, Scott, not just here at Linden, but all the teams that are trying to get ready presently right now with the possible season we're going to have. You got to take your hat off to these kids that are showing up on a consistent basis, not knowing for sure if we're going to practice because of the pandemic or because of the weather quality or because of the heat or because of something else that's come up. And there's always that doubt in their mind, are we having a season or not? And yet they're showing up every day, and they need that. Not so much the football aspect of it, but to just get away from that computer and be out there and be with people.
Yeah. You bring up such a great point, because our athletes today, right now, are dealing with something that nobody's ever had to deal with in the past.
You're right.
But I think one of the messages that we've sent out on this show in previous episodes is it's going to come down to what is each individual doing outside of what the regulations state that they can do. So, for example, we've had a couple athletes on here that have committed to play Division I sports already, and to a T, they agree that they have to put in their own time to get better at their respective sports, and it doesn't matter what you do. So if you're an athlete, and you can, I would love to have you weigh in on this, Coach, and I think you'll agree with this. If you're an athlete and you're showing up to, let's say your school has a conditioning hour between 6 and 7:30, and you're showing up for that, and you're busting your tail and you're doing everything you're supposed to do, but that's all you're doing, it's just not enough.
And while you're not doing it, somebody that you're competing against is doing it.
That's right.
And when you guys lock up, you're going to come out, it's not going to have a good outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, the message that I try to send this to my kids is, most people are looking at this as, oh man, this is a terrible time. Why me? Why is this going on? You have to look at it as an opportunity. I'm spending less time in school, which me personally, I think that's terrible, because I think school serves more purpose than just
books.
The academics. I think it serves the social aspect that is required for people. But beyond that, you have more time now. You have more time now. What are you doing with your time? Are you doing anything before you get on the computer in the morning? Or what are you doing when you get off the computer in the morning? You have more time because your practice schedule is so depleted. So again, I know that's a point we've made in the past, but it's great to hear your perspective on it, Coach. Again, hey, thanks for being here. We really enjoy talking to you. We're hoping that we hear from more listeners, and with that, go to Twitter at 209 Prep, and on Facebook we're at 209 Prep Sports. You can email us at prepsports209@yahoo.com, and Grant is monitoring that email every day, and we'd love to hear from you. It's our goal as we move forward to develop a website where we can be more interactive with the listeners. We can kind of do some more real-time stuff, but look forward to that down the road. This interview was brought to you by Herrera Insurance and Financial Services Incorporated, the premier commercial farm and life insurance agency in the 209. For all of your personal and business insurance needs, you can locate us at www.hifsinc.com or by phone at 209-649-8863. Herrera Insurance and Financial Services is a proud sponsor of the 209 Prep Sports Podcast, helping our youth fulfill their athletic dreams and endeavors. Again, we'd like to thank today's guest, Coach Mark Miller, And on part of Grant and myself and 209 Prep Sports, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
And Chris will be back here next time with a lot more questions for you. So
exactly.